Hello, and welcome to this video where we will explain the life and works of Adrienne Kennedy, an African-American playwright well known for her surrealist plays. She is recognized as an influential figure in the Black arts movement. She has also lectured as a professor at multiple colleges and universities. Now, to begin, Adrienne Kennedy was born Adrienne Lita Hawkins on September 13th, 1931, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Her mother, Ada Hawkins, was a teacher, and her father, Cornell Wallace Hawkins, was a social worker. For most of her childhood, she was raised in Cleveland, Ohio. She attended Ohio State University and graduated in 1953 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in education. Now, it is worth noting that while at Ohio State University, women like Kennedy were forced into taking education. Women like her were not allowed to take studies such as English. She would later continue her education at Columbia University in New York. After she graduated Ohio State, she would marry Joseph Kennedy, and they would later have two children. Adrienne Kennedy's first play to get produced was named Funny House of a Negro, which she wrote in 1960 while she was visiting Ghana with her husband, Joseph Kennedy. Her work as a playwright is mostly known for dealing with racial, sexual, and religious themes. Lastly, Kennedy has lectured at Yale University, Princeton University, Brown University, University of California, Berkeley, Harvard University, Stanford University, New York University, and University of California, Davis. Throughout Kennedy's childhood and early life, she admired playwrights like Tennessee Williams, known for The Glass Menagerie and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. She also admired Orson Welles, a famous director and actor known for films like Citizen Kane. Both of these men were influential to her in pushing her towards the theater of the absurd. Adrienne Kennedy also worked with Edward Albee, another famous playwright known for tackling issues such as societal class. She experienced racism firsthand while in Ohio, as she felt ostracized by her white classmates in school. In Kennedy's plays, the racism seen is a reflection of the racism she has experienced throughout her own life. As a woman of mixed race as well, Kennedy may have felt ostracized by both whites and blacks. In 1960, Adrienne Kennedy and her husband visited Ghana because her husband received a grant from the African Research Foundation, which related to his psychology degree. This is where she wrote her first one-act play to be produced, Funny House of a Negro, as I mentioned earlier. It is also where she would receive inspiration for one of her later plays, She Talks to Beethoven. Instead of using classical storytelling, Kennedy often relies on surrealist and expressionist narratives. One trend which Adrienne Kennedy was influenced by and took part in is the theater of the absurd. This form of theater became popular after World War II and is known for its dreamlike qualities. It is also heavily tied in with the avant-garde movement in the film industry. This movement began with European writers in the 1950s and would become popular in America later in the 1960s and 1970s. Samuel Beckett, for instance, an Irish playwright, is considered the father of absurdist theater. One example of one of his plays would be Waiting for Godot. The plot of absurdist plays is usually complex, disconnected, and can leave audiences puzzled as to what the meaning is. Absurdist plays often contain themes of futility, loneliness, and rebellion. Another movement which Adrienne Kennedy is associated with is the Black Arts Movement of 1965 through 1975 in America. The Black Arts Movement is the name for a group of writers, artists, and musicians who were motivated to speak on race-related issues after the peak of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Poet Amiri Baraka is considered the father of the Black Arts Movement. Hotspots for the Black Arts Movement include New York, Chicago, Detroit, and San Francisco. Some of the biggest names in the Black Arts Movement include Lorraine Hansberry, Audre Lorde, Ntozake Shange, James Baldwin, and Thelonious Monk. While the movement contained a vast amount of creative works, certain writers, including Adrienne Kennedy, would be alienated from the group. One reason for this could be the fact that the movement contained hypermasculine characters often, while much of Kennedy's work focused on her female characters. Her absurdist style, as well, may not have been as accepted as classical works were, because they were more popular at that time. Now, the first play of Adrienne Kennedy's that we will discuss is her most well known play, Funny House of a Negro. Unlike most plays of the Black Arts Movement, Funny House focuses on a female character's perspective named Sarah. This plot focuses on the madness of racism as it occurs in Sarah's mind. Adrienne Kennedy's mixed race is reflected in this story. It is also noted that many characters lose their hair throughout the story, which symbolizes the anxiety that they all have. While traveling in Ghana, Kennedy also visited England, France, and Spain, where she received inspiration for the characters in this play. Most of this play's characters are based on real historical figures. For instance, the Duchess of Habsburg. Her and her husband, the Austrian Archduke Maximilian, were appointed to rule in Mexico. When revolutionaries executed her husband, it is said that she developed a schizophrenic disorder. Next is the Queen Victoria Regina. This is the Queen of the United Kingdom from 1837 to 1901. She was also the Empress of India from 1876 to 1901. It is said that she struggled with familial issues and depression during her rule. Thirdly, we have Jesus, who is traditionally known as the primary figure of Christianity. And lastly, we have Patrice Lumumba, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Congo from June 1960 to December of 1960. He was executed by a firing squad, and both the United States and the United Kingdom have been accused for conspiring in his murder. He was known as an activist for independence. The European queens are usually represented by black actresses wearing whiteface, and the same is for Jesus. This play was first produced in 1964 at the East End Theater in New York, and it was directed by Michael Kahn. The themes of Funny House include racial identity, mixed ancestry and the self-hatred that is related to that, anxiety, sexuality, and persecution. Other characters that I haven't already mentioned include the mother of Sarah, Sarah's landlady, otherwise known as the Funny House Woman, and Raymond, otherwise known as the Funny House Man. These characters represent Sarah's connection to reality, while the other historical characters represent manifestations of her identity. The Duchess and the Queen represent Sarah's European side, her sexuality, and are also a representation of European colonialism as a whole. Jesus is used as a symbol for sacrifice. He also represents Sarah's hatred for her black father, whom she believes raped her mother. Patrice Lumumba represents a desire for liberation, as well as Sarah's African ancestry and her self-hatred. The story follows Sarah in a dreamlike sequence. The set is her bedroom, and these characters converse there. Sarah searches for comfort in her identity as the dialogue between these manifestations ultimately turn hateful. Another play which is worthy of note and analysis is Adrienne Kennedy's She Talks to Beethoven. Adrienne Kennedy wrote a series of plays named the Alexander plays after a recurring character named Suzanne Alexander. These plays were based on Kennedy's experiences and memories as well. Suzanne Alexander, the heroine, can be considered a stand in for Adrienne Kennedy's identity. The plot is set in Ghana in 1961. This is after Ghana gained independence from the British Empire in 1957. During 1961, there was much tension in Ghana due to its leadership trying to determine how would they progress as a nation. There was a bombing which threatened President Nkrumah. Socialism was on the rise, and Queen Elizabeth II even made a controversial visit during this time in Ghana. The other main character, whom Suzanne Alexander is conversating with throughout the majority of the play, is Ludwig van Beethoven. Beethoven, the famous composer, was known to have multiple health issues. For context, he was known for going deaf later in his life. There is also speculation that Beethoven could have been partly of African descent, and this is hinted at in the plot of She Talks to Beethoven. Another historical figure mentioned is Frantz Fanon. He was a Afro-Caribbean psychiatrist and a political philosopher. He was very influential for his Marxist ideologies. This play was first produced in Woodstock, New York in 1989, and it was directed by Clinton Turner Davis. The themes of Kennedy's She Talks to Beethoven include isolation, affirming one's identity, finding familiarity through boundaries, and the power of love through adversity. Compared to some of the other works by Adrienne Kennedy, this play is considered to have a more optimistic meaning than the others. The story begins with Suzanne Alexander lying sick in her bedroom in Accra, Ghana. While in her room, she has a small radio, a photo of Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah, a book on Beethoven, and a wedding photo of herself and her husband David. Suzanne, a black woman in her 30s, is deep in thought about the whereabouts of David. It is feared that he could be kidnapped or driven into hiding for her safety. The reports on the radio represent the backstory to Alexander in 1961 Ghana and Beethoven in 1803 Vienna. They also represent Suzanne's inner thoughts and how she relates her husband to Frantz Fanon and Beethoven. As she reads a book on Ludwig van Beethoven, she ends up in conversation with him. Suzanne and Beethoven end up becoming kindred spirits in a sense, as they work in the same area. Suzanne is focusing on her writing, and Beethoven is composing his opera, Fidelio. You can hear Fidelio as well as some Ghanaian string music in the background as they dialogue. Suzanne is told about Beethoven's fears about working in Vienna. This is because the Napoleonic Wars were in full swing, and Vienna was under threat of being invaded by chasseurs, or the French infantrymen. Suzanne also learns about the illnesses which Beethoven suffers from, including his eventual loss of hearing. Beethoven can relate to Suzanne's fears about losing David because he worries for his nephew Karl. Lastly, Suzanne relates her marriage with David with the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. David's voice on the radio can be heard quoting Frantz Fanon on the issue of liberation, much like how Orpheus worried about freeing his love Eurydice from the underworld. To wrap things up, here are some of Adrienne Kennedy's feats, awards, and honors. First of all, Adrienne Kennedy was a founding member of the Women's Theater Council in 1971. It is worth noting that much of the recognition that Adrienne Kennedy receives has come much later in her career. In 2022, Adrienne Kennedy's 1992 play, Ohio State Murders, debuted on Broadway for the first time in the James Earl Jones Theater. It was directed by Kenny Leon. Adrienne Kennedy has won a Stanley Drama Award from the New York City Writers Conference at Wagner College. She has won two Obie Awards, one for Distinguished Play in 1964 and the other for Best New American Play in 1992. She was also honored at the 2008 Obie Awards with a Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2022, the Dramatists Guild of America named Kennedy as recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award.